Okay, welcome to today's program. My name is Rhonda Hoffman. I'm the genealogy specialist at the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. Today's topic is Breaking Old World, Finding Foreign Places of Birth in American Records. I work in the Grovener room. It's at the Central Library in downtown Buffalo. It's our special collections department, which includes genealogy, local history, maps, music scores, and rare books. When you come visit us, we're open the same hours as the rest of the library. We do have some different policies than the rest of the library, just so you're not surprised. We have you put any kind of bags in lockers. We don't allow food or drink in our department. And if you want to view a rare book, you would make an appointment for that. Otherwise, you can just come and visit us whenever the library is open. There will be a handout for this program. All of the websites that I mentioned will be on there. All of the major points on the records I'm presenting will be on there, and where to find the records I'll talk about will be on the handout. It will be emailed to you after the class is over. First, I'd like to tell you about the Grovener Room's subject guides. We have an extensive list of guides that will help you determine what types of materials we have in our collection. And the category you might be interested in related to today's program is the ethnic and immigrant genealogy category. So you can see there's a lot of Buffalo's major immigrant groups are listed here, as well as down at the bottom, there's a handout called Where is My Immigrant Ancestor From?, which highlights some of the material that I'll talk to you about today. There's a few databases that I'll be mentioning throughout the presentation. One of them is Ancestry Library Edition. Whenever one of the items that I mention is in Ancestry, you'll see a green and white ALE symbol on the slide. This is a subscription database, just about the same thing as Ancestry.com. The main difference is that you can't personalize the library version of it. It's available at all of our Buffalo and Erie County Public Library locations. It's not available from home through us. If you live out of the area, check with your local library because they might subscribe also. And the library version includes the US and foreign content. So if you subscribe, say, to just the US content at home, you could come to the library and access the foreign content if you don't want to pay for that at home. Next, there's Heritage Quest Online. So if you'll see an HQ on the screen if the resource I'm talking about is in Heritage Quest. It's another library subscription database. It's available at every one of our libraries and also from home with a Buffalo and Erie County Public Library card. If you live or work or go to school or own property in Erie County, you can get a library card for free. If you live elsewhere in New York State, there's a fee that you pay every year. I think it's $20 or $25 for 6 months. If you live out of New York State, unfortunately, you can't get a library card with us, but check again with your local library because they may have access to Heritage Quest. Heritage Quest includes census records, family and local history books, city directories, Friedman bank records, Revolutionary War pension files, and other resources. The last one is Familysearch.org. So you'll see an FS on the screen if the resource is in Familysearch. It's the free genealogy website of the LDS Church. It includes billions of records from all over the world. And certain resources, although they try to make everything online for free for everyone, certain resources you can only view at Family History Library affiliates or Family History centers. And the Grovener Room is the Family History Library affiliate. So if when you try to look at a record set, it tells you you can view it at an affiliate, you could come down to the Grovener Room and either use our wireless with your laptop or use our computers to access those materials. So when we're trying to break ground in the old world, first we want to do thorough research in the new world. And, first you want to learn as much as you can about your immigrant ancestor so that you can properly identify your ancestor in foreign records. So learn things like their nickname, middle name, assumed names, birth dates, family member names, and their dates of birth. And then once you do that, we can look to American records to find the foreign location of birth. First, ask your relatives what they might have in their collections, things like letters, Bibles, diaries, other documents. You never know what your family might have already, and maybe that information that you need is already in those home sources. And you never know when someone's going to decide to clean out their house, and they might get rid of those materials. So ask your relatives as soon as you can so those documents don't get lost. I've broken up the different categories into the A, B, and C list. So the A list is where I would go first. So these records I would go to first to look for foreign place of birth. Church records, especially Catholic and Lutheran records. Something you should know is they're often in Latin or the language of the parish's heritage. For Catholic, they're often in Latin. But don't be intimidated by that, because you can usually pick out the pieces of information, and there's different guides that are available to help you translate those records. The locations that you might find in church records might be the exact location where your ancestor was born. It might be the location where records were kept, say the church records or civil records. Or they might say the nearest commonly recognized town. Like, I don't know you guys, but I'm from Dunkirk, which is in Chautauqua County. And whenever we would go into Canada, they would ask, where are you from? And my dad would say Buffalo, because people would recognize Buffalo, but they wouldn't recognize Dunkirk. And we didn't want to have to explain that. So people in church records, might do the exact same thing. Baptismal records of the children born in the US of an immigrant couple is a great place to look. This is an example from St. Columba, a Roman Catholic church in Buffalo. This is from 1906. And so we have the baptism of Francis Zappilli, and it lists the parents' names, and then it says ex loco, which is where are they from. And it tells that they're both from the province of Basilicata. Marriage records also, I would say marriage records are the most likely to include this information. Here we have an example from an Evangelical United Brethren Church in Cleveland, Ohio from 1940. And we see a Richard Alghini from Bologna, Italy. And then we see Charles Barkel and Erika Ahl from Stettin, Germany, and Freiburg, Germany. This is a death burial record from an Episcopal Church in Medina, New York from 1902. I would say burials, you're least likely to find this information, but you still can. So we see a Samuel Howard. He's from Norfolk County, England. He was born in 1833. And down at the bottom, we see a Mary Warrender from Kidderminster, England. And she was born on January 11th, 1843. Church records from the Buffalo area. We have a large collection in the Grovener room, especially for Erie County, but some other locations as well. Those guides that I showed you earlier, we have a very detailed guide of everything that we have in alphabetical order, and what baptismal records we have, communion, marriage, death or burial records. It tells all the date ranges that we have. The Muffle History Museum is another place to check. Family history centers, historical societies, local historians, genealogy society libraries, try all those things. The Western New York Genealogical Society, who have their collection at the library, has a great collection of especially evangelical and Lutheran records that they're not available anywhere else except for the church and then the archive in Philadelphia. Familysearch is another great place to look. What I recommend doing is using the Familysearch catalog. So you go to the search menu and select catalog. And then you want to search for the town that the church is in. So here I'm showing you Buffalo. You can choose online to restrict it just to online records and click search. And then you'll see the resources for Buffalo in alphabetical order by category. Here we see church records, and that number 79 is how many of these records are online. So we've got 79 different churches for Buffalo. And you can just, look through the list, find the church name you're interested in, and then just select it. And you'll see the record. It'll tell you what year they have for all the different types of records. And then down towards the bottom, under Film Digital Notes, you'll see Format. If you see a little magnifying glass, it means you can keyword search them. If you see a camera, it means the records have been digitized. And the key means usually that it's not accessible from home. But sometimes I've noticed lately, it shows that key because you're not logged into your free Familysearch account. So make sure you log in and don't just assume you can't access it from home. If you click on that and then it's not available from home, it'll give you a message. Find My Past is a subscription database. It is not available through the library, but you can subscribe to it at home. And if you're looking for Catholic records for these major US cities that you see listed here, you can access many of them in Find My Past. So Baltimore, Chicago, Cincinnati, Toledo, New York City, Philadelphia. You also want to look for church records in Ancestry. I recommend going to Ancestry's card catalog and putting the word church in the title, and you'll see a list of different church collections that they have. And then you can also contact the church itself if it's still in existence. Contact the church that it merged with, if it merged with another church. And you can also contact the local diocese or regional record center to try to find the records. I know for the Buffalo area, the diocese does not do genealogical research. So hopefully what you need might be at the library, or if the church is still in existence, that's a way to go. Sometimes individual churches will do genealogy research for people, sometimes they don't. Naturalization records are a great place to find foreign place of birth, especially from around 1900 to the present. Naturalization is the legal process of a foreigner becoming a citizen. So from September 1906 to the present, the US had very detailed standardized forms. Before that time frame, often naturalization records will only list a country of citizenship, but sometimes they do list a specific location. So you always want to make sure to check those early records. And that can vary from location to location. For Western New York, they're usually not as detailed, but I have seen some detailed records, so you definitely want to check. A little bit of history related to women and children and naturalization. From 1855 to 1922, women and minor children, which meant under 21, became naturalized through the male head of family. So for a lot of that time frame, they wouldn't be listed on that head of family's record until 1906. They would just have to find their husband or their father's record to prove that they were citizens. Beginning in 1906, you might see the children and the spouse named on the husband or father's records. Beginning in late September of 1922, alien women had to naturalize themselves, and then alien minor children still were naturalized through their parents. Here's an example from a Declaration of Intent from 1934. The Declaration of Intent was the first step in the naturalization process. So usually you had to be in the country for a certain amount of years. It all depends on the time frame. Oftentimes it's like 2 to 5 years, and then you can file this Declaration of Intent to become a US citizen. If your ancestor naturalized beginning in 1929, they kept photos. So you might get a nice photo of your ancestor. The Declaration of Intent includes a lot of the same information as the petition for citizenship, which I'll show you next, but something you usually get on the Declaration of Intent that you don't on the citizenship petition is a physical description. So in this example, we see that Frances Goldklang is she has a fair complexion. She's a female. She's white. She has brown eyes and brown hair. She's 5'4" and weighs 200 pounds. Many immigrants filed the Declaration of Intent, but never completed the naturalization process. So even if your ancestor wasn't naturalized, look for the papers for the Declaration of Intent. Sometimes they would need to file a Declaration of Intent to buy property. This is, especially the case when federal lands opened up. But they also may have just thought they wanted to become a citizen and never completed the process for whatever reason. Here's the petition for citizenship for Frances Goldklang. This was completed in 1937. So here we see her name when she was naturalizing. We see that she was born in Bukovina, Austria on October 28th, 1898, that she's Hebrew, that she's married, and her husband is Jacob Goldklang, and they were married on December 13th, 1919 in New York City, and he was born in Mielitz, Austria on February 18th, 1891. He entered the United States in New York City in February of 1909. It lists all of her children and their dates of birth, where they were born, and their residence at the time that this petition was filled out. It says that when she came to the US, she came under the name Frances Wallach. So likely that's her maiden name or perhaps a prior married name. We see that her last foreign residence was Bukovina, and that she came to the US from Hamburg, Germany, and she came in at New York City in February of 1901 on the SS Stotterdam. This is an example of one of those early records. This is from Lockport, New York in 1847. And although these usually aren't very detailed, this does list a location. It tells that this individual was born in Dumfriesshire, Scotland. This is a record set in Ancestry Library Edition, or you can find it at the New York State Archives. It's naturalization papers of Central and Western New York. And this one says that the individual was born in the year 1805 in the county of Sussex, England. And from there he immigrated and arrived in the United States in the month of April in 1830, and that he's resided in Rochester, New York ever since that time. You can find clues to naturalization in census records. One that's especially good is the 1925 New York State Census, which is in Ancestry. And I have boxed off Charles and Hilda Falk. And it says for Charles that he was naturalized in BFLO, so Buffalo, in 1921. And then for Hilda, it says by Marge, meaning by marriage. Federal census records from 1900 to 1950 list whether someone is naturalized or an alien. So you can narrow down when someone might have been naturalized. So, they're not naturalized in 1900, but they are in 1910, then you know the time frame that they were naturalized. 1920 lists the year that they were naturalized. And 1900 through 1930 lists if naturalization papers have been taken out. And it'll tell you where they are in the process. So it would say PA if papers were taken out. So that would usually mean that they filed the declaration of intent, but haven't completed the process. And if they have completed the process, it would say NA, meaning they were naturalized already. Before September 27th of 1906, any court could naturalize. So municipal, county, state, federal courts could naturalize. They could file a declaration of intent and petition for citizenship in 2 different courts. So you might have to look in multiple places, and they can be in different locations. They could have started the process in one state, then moved away and completed it in another. Oftentimes you'll find the early records in county clerk's offices, and that's where I would go to look for early Erie County naturalizations. And then after that, 1906, there are a lot of people were naturalized in federal district courts. And we have an index from 1906 to 1966 in the Grovener room on microfilm for those federal district court naturalizations. Some naturalizations are in Familysearch. So again, I recommend going to the search menu and clicking the catalog and put in Erie County. If you're looking for naturalizations, generally it would be at the county level. And then you'll see your categories alphabetically, and you want to look for naturalization and citizenship. And then there is, for Erie County, you see this Naturalization Records 1831 to 1906. And then there's an index from 1831 to 1930. So if you're doing Erie County, that's where I would start. And then you can look for the index cards at the alphabetical ranges. Choose the right alphabetical range, click on the camera, and then you can look alphabetically through the cards and see if your ancestor is listed there. If they're listed there, you'll know that you can find the records at the Erie County Clerk's office. And it'll tell you the book and page number and what court. They have Superior and County Court naturalizations there. There's also a record set called New York County Naturalization Records from 1791 to 1980. Erie County is not in this record set, but most of the other Western New York counties and other counties in New York are in here. These are not the federal district court naturalizations. These are the county clerk office naturalizations. So you can keyword search this database. There is also a Western New York District Court Naturalization Index in Familysearch. So how I would find that in the Familysearch catalog is by going to the title field and selecting Naturalization Western New York. And there's something called Alphabetical Index to the Petitions for Naturalization. This is the same thing that the library has on microfilm. You can keyword search it, and you'll get your hits and look for who you think is the right one. If you click on their record, you'll see some detail here, so you can see his name and his naturalization date. And then you'll see an image, but you can't view the image of the cards that they scanned for this unless you subscribe to Fold 3. The library does not subscribe to Fold 3, but we do have these on microfilm. So you can look that up on microfilm. So I looked this one up there, and it gives you a little more detail. So you can see that it has information. DEC would be the Declaration of Intent, and it gives the full date there, the petition for citizenship. It gives the full date there. To the left, those numbers are the declaration number and the petition number. And then to the right, there's a volume number. So volume 1, and then page 20. Volume 3, page 117. Then we're lucky, just how we did that search for the index right below it, you should get the hits for some of these naturalization records for the federal district court are online as well. So Western District Petitions for Naturalization. And then you'll see them listed there. You just look for the right date range. And if you got the volume number, you can look for the volume number. So here we are at volume 3. So even if you only have the year, even if you don't have access to Fold 3, you can't come to the library, you can look in the volume, and there is an index in the front of each of those volumes. And it'll tell you what page number to look at. And you can see to the right, in the top right, there's the page number 117. To the top left, there's that certificate number 317. You can see it's the right record there, Frederick Charles Klein. Passenger lists are also an excellent way to find foreign places of birth. It wasn't until 1820 that the US required keeping passenger lists. Unfortunately for Canada and Mexico, border crossing records you won't find until at least 1895. And the Buffalo area, not until 1902. From 1820 to 1892, the records weren't that detailed, but sometimes you can see a specific location or at least a region that your ancestor came from. In this example, it's from 1880 at the Port of New York. And you can see they list some German states, Bavaria, Hesse, and Prussia, where these individuals came from. From 1893 forward, you're going to find some great information. Last place of legal residence, if they were ever in the US before, where and when. Their place of birth, they started recording in 1906. Their name and address of the nearest relative in their home country beginning in 1907, as well as other great information like if in the US, who are they joining, and the address of that person, the relationship to that person. Here's an example. Ancestry is a great source of passenger lists. I usually start there. So the passenger lists look very similar to a census record. They're a very large, like schedule type of form. If we zoom in, we can see this is for the ship Mauritania. The top listing is for Lawrence Taylor, who was 31 years old, a farmer. He can read and write. He's British and Irish. His last permanent residence was Portumna, Ireland. And then the person nearest person to him in Ireland is his father, Lawrence Taylor of Portumna, County Galway. And his final destination is New York City. These usually have 2 pages, so always make sure you turn the page. And it gives a physical description here. He's 5'8", dark complexion, dark hair, brown eyes. He doesn't have any marks of identification like a scar or something like that. His place of birth, again, was Portumna in Ireland. Border crossing records are available in Ancestry and Familysearch for Canada and Mexico from about 1895 to 1954 or 1964 for Mexico. These pretty much give the same information as passenger lists. So you're going to see city and country of last permanent residence, city and county of birth, or sorry, city and country of birth, name and address of the nearest relative in the foreign country from whence they came. So you can see these actually, you might see them in a couple different formats. One is it'll look just like a passenger list. And another is this card format where they've taken information from the passenger list and put it on a card. This one I thought was an interesting example. We see an Ida Berg, and she's from Narp, Finland. That was her last permanent residence. Her closest relative is her mother, and it names her, and she's also from Narp. And she's going to her sister, Mrs. Helmy Jones, in San Francisco. A couple of other things I thought was interesting is that she's coming to the US to legalize her status and remain in the US. And it also listed a Finnish passport number. So, maybe Finland has those in an archive and you could get a copy of that passport record. Border crossings were generally just for immigrants coming into the US. They didn't track US citizens coming into the country, but they did track resident aliens. So if your ancestor hadn't naturalized and they went into Canada or Mexico and then came back, you might find a border crossing. So this is an example. And then, sometimes you can see a photograph on these records too. It has her alien registration number on there, and it does say that her birth date and that she was born in Monterrey, Mexico. We do have Canadian border crossing records in the Grovener room on microfilm for arrivals at Buffalo, Lewiston, Niagara Falls, Rochester from 1902 to 1954. And again, those are on Ancestry and Familysearch. There was an Alien Registration Act of 1940 where aliens 14 or older who were living in the US and after that also had to be registered and fingerprinted. This is an example. This is a gentleman who was born in Arcamo, Italy. It gives a physical description, 5'10", 165 pounds, black hair, brown eyes. He arrived in New York City in 1906. There is an index for the alien registrations. It says Kansas City, but there are locations all over the place in these records. For example, the one we see here, Jane Pucco, she naturalized in Buffalo, New York on March 2nd, 1961. We can see she has two names listed here, Pucco and Wenzikowski. So one of those is probably a married and one of those is probably a maiden name. It gives her birth date, it gives her arrival date at the Port of New York. So while it doesn't give a foreign place of birth, it does give you a great lead to naturalization records and passenger lists. You can order those records through the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Office. They do various searches for the alien registrations, for some visa files, some other types of files, and I'm not going to get into this. You can go on their website and read all about that. There is a fee for requesting those records, but that is a great place to go for these types of records. If your ancestor lived in the time where they would have had Social Security began in 1935. If they're deceased, you could order a copy of their Social Security application. So here we see an example of a Robert Troy. It asks a lot of different great genealogical questions like date of birth, parents' names, including mother's maiden name and where they worked. But it also includes place of birth. So here we can see he was born in Kildare, Ireland. There is a Social Security death index in Ancestry, Familysearch, Heritage Quest. Here we see an example for Hume Cronin. It tells his birth date, and it also gives his death date, June 15th, 2003, and his last residence was in Flushing. So if he's in here, you get great information to help you obtain the Social Security application. You've got the number, you've got when he died and when he was born, and then you can put in a Freedom of Information Act request through the Social Security Administration to get a copy for a fee of his Social Security application. There's something in Ancestry called the Social Security Application and Claims Index. And here's a couple of great examples. Here to the left, we see a Joseph Leonard Perry, who also went by Joseph L. Berry, just Joseph Perry. He was from Sardinia in Italy, gives his birth date. It gives his parents' names. And I thought this one was interesting because I think you kind of see where the Americanization of the name comes in. His father was listed as last name Pirai, and then it seems to have been Americanized to Perry. And then to the right, we see an Antonina Cibatar, who has another name, which seems like it's a maiden name. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it, but the father is listed with that last name. And she's also listed under a kind of unusual name, Rachel Rank. So that's completely different. So that can be a very helpful piece of information to know. And of course, we've got where she's from, Wilna in Poland. Military records are another good place to look. World War I draft registrations. There were multiple drafts. So it depends on the draft as to whether it's going to have foreign place of birth. But to the left, we see John Dromgoole. He was born in Kilkenny, Ireland. And then a little bit lower on the line number 7, it lists where his father's birthplace was. And so that says Louth, Ireland. And then to the right, we see Peter Higgins, and he was born in Derry City, Ireland. And his father was from Londonderry County, Ireland. And we also see the name of the nearest relative. And in this case, his nearest relative is Roseanne Higgins, who lives in Derry City, Ireland. So maybe that's a sibling, maybe that's his wife. So there's another great clue. These are in Ancestry and Familysearch. There was a World War II draft for older men. So these aren't men who would have gone into fighting service. This would be someone that they were looking for skills that might help the cause of the war. And here we see a Martin Bernhardt, and it lists his foreign place of birth as Kriven Poznan in Germany, which is now Poland. It also gives his date of birth. Military enlistment records can have foreign place of birth. These Army registrations from 1798 through 1914 are in Ancestry. We can see a Joseph Adams was born in St. Mary's in Canada. And we also see a Joseph Amann is from Wildorf, Baden, Germany. Military discharge papers can also include foreign place of birth. This is for John Flink of Kaldi, Finland. Military discharge records, it may be something that your family member has kept. When someone was discharged, they would also often file a copy of their discharge papers at the county clerk's office, wherever it is they settled when they were out of the military, just to keep it on file in case they need it for something. And you could also order a copy of this from the Personnel Records Office in St. Louis. So it's called the National Personnel Records Center. And then if you're looking for pre-World War I records, you can obtain some of those from the National Archives. So next we'll move on to the B list. So if those places don't pan out, this is where I would check next. See if your ancestor ever took out a passport. This is an example from 1914. So here we see there is a photo with this record. I'm sorry, this one is actually 1919. 1914 is when they required photographs. This Ambrose Beale is from Ebbw Vale in England. It gives his date of birth, and it tells his date of birth as September 9th, 1882. US required passports for travel during the Civil War, for certain years during World War I, and then they began permanently requiring them in 1941. The National Archives passports from 1795 into 1925 are on Ancestry and Familysearch. And then the US Department of State has them after that. You can put in a Freedom of Information Act request for copies of those. And just because passports weren't required doesn't mean that people didn't take them out. So, people wanted them for protection, for proof of identification when they were traveling. So people still took them out even if they didn't have to. Look in newspapers, especially obituaries. This example, I was searching for this family. I got all the records I could think of for every member of this family. And the last thing that I found was this obituary for Bartley J. Heinz. And it says he was born in Galway, Ireland, 50 years ago, which is a county, but it considerably narrowed things down instead of searching for all of Ireland for this family. And this person died suddenly. And he was kind of a popular guy in the community. So they wrote a detailed article about him. And it says, the family settled in the Old First, where his father, Martin Heinz, after working for a time on the docks, went into business for himself. Mrs. Heinz was a widow when she married, and there were 2 children by the first marriage, William and P.J. Feeney, both living in this city, and 2 by the second marriage, Bartley J. and Coleman of Buffalo, who survives. So wonderful detail there. There are some foreign language newspapers. We do have a couple of, or I should say a few newspapers for the Buffalo area. This is an example of a German newspaper. There are a few German newspapers, and then there's also a Polish language newspaper for Buffalo. Don't be intimidated because it's in a foreign language. Oftentimes you can at least identify an obituary. You can see to the left where it's got the name, which is readable, and you've got crosses by the name. Often flowers might be by the name for an obituary. And then this one, a retired staff member translated this one for us. And it says that this gentleman was born in Ansbach, Bavaria, and he came to Buffalo about 50 years ago. And this was from 1899. The Polish Genealogical Society of New York State is in the Buffalo area. They have some online databases on their website. They're still working on this, but there is an index to the Dziennik, which is the Polish newspaper. They've got a lot from 1911 to 1941, but they're still working on things. Some of the example of the newspapers we have in the Grovener room. We have lots of newspapers for Buffalo, 1818 to the present. Here's some of those German newspapers, the Polish one, and we do have some other Erie County newspapers. In our list of guides, there is a newspaper guide, and it's very detailed as to what we have for the Western New York area. A lot of you have probably used Fulton History. It's a free website that includes a lot of newspapers for all over, but there is a large chunk of newspapers from the Buffalo area from around 1840 until around 1960. There's also New York State Historic Newspapers.org. This is a free site that many libraries and archives put their newspapers that are digitized. You just click on the county and you'll see what's available for that county. There's also the subscription database, newspapers.com. There are a number of Buffalo area newspapers in there: Angola, Black Rock, Buffalo, Depew, Dunkirk, Hamburg, and some others. The library does not have access to this, but you can subscribe to it yourself. The library has a card file that we call our local history file, which is a partial index to newspapers. It covers mainly the 1920s to 1982. It mainly indexes newspapers, but it also indexes some books and magazines. It's not an every name index, it's a partial index. So you can look up people's names, all types of Buffalo history topics. Look in books, especially old business directories. Often old business directories might be very detailed. They might include biographical sketches of the owner's names. In this example, we see a Donald Bain, who was a dealer in hops and brewer's supplies on Main Street in Buffalo. And it tells that he is a native of England, born in Cheltenham in 1828, and that he came to Buffalo in 1847. This is something we call a mug book. If a lot of times in the past, there would be these salesmen that would come around and they're going to publish a book. Maybe it was a local history book. It might focus just on people. It might be a general local history where it would have biographies in the back. And if you could pay for a subscription to that book, you could get your mug put in the book. So that's why we call them mug books. And there are some for foreign populations. This is one for the Buffalo's German population. There's one for the Polish population. And you can see they are in a foreign language, but this person, it says he was born September 12th, 1843 in Monkenbach in Germany. This is one for one of my ancestors. This is one of my families that they went by two names, and like, why did they go by these two names? They went by Johnson and they went by Jasiek, Jasiek. And Jacob Johnson is like a great uncle of mine, and he was a business owner in Buffalo. And this sketch says that he's from this location. I think you would say at Piesnico, something like that. I'm sure I said it wrong, in West Prussia. And it also told why the name was changed. And the story that it says in this book is that children, when he was growing up and going to school, they had a hard time saying his last name. So they just decided to call him Johnson. And then the family, oftentimes in records, would name themselves as Johnson. Vital records may have a foreign place of birth. This is a marriage record for Erie County. We have them on microfilm from 1877 to 1935. And this Maximilian Bozek was born in Zimmern in Bavaria in Germany. I would say marriage records are probably the most likely place out of the vital records that you'll find a foreign place of birth. But check those Buffalo birth records, because sometimes they will list the parents' foreign place of birth. We do have Buffalo birth records on microfilm. We actually have them 1878 to 1913. This is an example from 1881. And I've found whoever was sending in the birth return, so say a lot of times in the early time frame, it would be a midwife. So here we see a Barbara Podinsky down at the bottom. I find that if they're of the ethnic group of the couple who had the child, you're more likely to see a specific foreign place of birth. So this, the father was from Denbighshire and Posen, and the mother was also from Chajuzuo, Posen. Here's an example, seems like a British surname, Mrs. Looney. And this couple is from Ireland, and it tells the particular locations they're from in Ireland. And here's a German example. Mrs. Dahlke was the person who registered the birth, and the father, it lists his specific town of birth in Germany. Gravestones, especially if your people are from Ireland or Scotland, they often like to put where they were from on the gravestones. So George Ray was born in Dumfries, Scotland, and his wife, Jane Sims, was born in Armagh in Ireland. And both of those are counties and cities. So we don't know if that's a county or a city, but at least it narrows things down. Look for estate papers. Don't assume that because you had kind of a poor immigrant ancestor that they had nothing, or they're a recent immigrant ancestor and they died right after they came here. Don't assume they have nothing. Because here we see an example of a Thomas Murphy who passed away in 1876. And he did have some property, and he was new here. His family hadn't even come over to the US. And it lists, these will, the petition for probate, if there wasn't a will list the heirs. So it lists his wife, Mary Murphy. And it says he also has children, and that their mother is living at Raw 13 Parish, New Ross County of Wexford, Ireland. And I've even seen, I saw a woman one time, she was born in Germany and she outlived her children and her spouse and had no heirs left in the US. She was there for decades. And her nearest heirs were her nieces and nephews in Germany, and it said where they were from in Germany. So look for those estate papers. Estate papers you could get at county clerk's offices, or I'm sorry, county probate, the surrogate court office, which Erie Counties is in Erie County Hall. So we're getting close to the end. I'm going to show you the C list now. Census records sometimes list a more specific place of birth. Oftentimes, for foreign birth, they would just list a country name. But sometimes the instructions to the enumerators, and you can find those instructions online, specify that the census taker should write more specific regions where the person is from. So in 1920, they were directed to, if a person was born in, says they were born in Austria, German, Russia, or Turkey, as they were before the war, so World War I, enter the name of the province, state, or region in which they were born, such as Alsace-Lorraine, Bohemia, Bavaria, etc. So in this example, the couple Julia and Lawrence Miga were from the Galicia area of Poland, which was the Austrian area of Poland, kind of more towards Ukraine. Look for institutional records, so things like poorhouse ledgers. The library has Erie County poorhouse ledgers from 1829 to 1952. There are gaps in the collection, but sometimes the intake registers or deaths could list a more specific place of foreign birth. So here we see someone is from Bavaria, someone is from Württemberg in Germany. This is from an orphan home in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we can see that there are some specific locations: Canton, Bern, Leipzig in Germany. Look for employment and institutional records. You could look in a place called Archive Grid, which is, if you've ever used WorldCat, it's very similar. Archive Grid finds archival collections. It's a library catalog of archival collections all over the US and then some foreign countries as well. So like my family was from Dunkirk, so I wanted to see, are there any Brooks Locomotive Works records anywhere? And there was a collection listed here, and maybe you can get access to the employment records. Look in Ancestry for employment records. Usually if you go to the card catalog and search for the keyword employment or apprenticeship, you might come up with some records. Like here are some railroad records, for example. The Heritage Discovery Center in Buffalo, the Buffalo Irish Genealogical Society runs it. They have New York Central Railroad employee cards, and it does list birth and death dates and places if known. They do have on their website, you can see an index to those records. So you would just click on the index. It says Biggs Public Index. You click the download button. And then you can see that sometimes there is a column for foreign place of birth. Sometimes it says a specific place, sometimes it just says a country. But in the examples here, it does list the city and the country for these examples. There was something called a Freedman's Bank, which was put together after the Civil War, and it was meant for freed slaves and African Americans who served in the Civil War. So it was in service from 1865 through 1874. And for some reason, thousands of European immigrants also had accounts, especially if they were in the New York City area. These records are in Familysearch and Ancestry Library Edition. They're in Heritage Quest. So here's an example of one of those European immigrants. Thomas Davis was born in Manchester, England on April 1st, 1871. He was brought up in Scotland. It says he left 1841, I believe that is, last May. And it says his age, it gives a physical description, it tells who he works with, his wife's name, his children's name. It lists his brothers and sisters' names down at the bottom. And it says that they lived in Manchester, England. The US serial set, it's kind of a long shot, but I've seen some good immigrant information in these. The US serial set is a collection of unique materials published in serial form. So they come out periodically, like newspapers or magazines, kind of like that. And there are documents related to the US Senate and House of Representatives. Heritage Quest has some of these documents from 1789 through 1969. We have a database at the library called Heinz Online, which is a legal database that includes most content of the serial set. And HathiTrust, a free website, has some of these online as well. And it's useful to genealogists in that we as US citizens have the right to petition our government for redress of grievances. It's guaranteed by the First Amendment. So if we want something to happen and it's related to the federal government, and we try all different ways to try to get what we want. Maybe it's something like you're trying to get an increase in your military pension because you're disabled, something like that. You try every way else. The last thing you do is petition Congress. And many of our ancestors used this right, and you might find them in those published publications. So in this particular example, an immigrant named Alexander Nagy came to the US. He lived here for a while, and then he had a bout of insanity, and he hadn't been naturalized yet, so they kicked him out of the country. And then his family members were trying to get him back in the country because he had gone overseas, received some treatment, and he was recovered. And it gives extreme detail in this record. It tells he was born in Debrecen, Hungary, on August 9th, 1899. It lists his wife's name, where she was born, her date of birth. It gives the address. They were living in Austria when they were trying to get back in the country. It tells that he was a dressmaker. It tells information, exactly what happened. It gives information about his mom and his siblings. It's a great deal of information about this individual. Another thing, if you think your ancestor might have had a patent, if they might have filed for a patent, if they died, there may have been an heir to the patent who could have been overseas. So in this example, the heirs were from Linköping, Sweden, and it names them there. Ancestry has patents online from 1790 through 1909. And there's also a Google Patents website that has a lot of the patents on it as well. And so you also want to keep in mind, you're searching all these different places. Search all these different places for the family members too, especially siblings and parents if they came to the US. Sometimes a specific detail, kind of like the search I did in the newspapers for Bartley Heinz. All of the papers and obituaries and church records for all of his relatives, I couldn't find the information, but I did find that specific detail for him. So you want to look at family members too who came to the US, because maybe their records have a detail that your direct line ancestors won't. You can look at people like neighbors and acquaintances, especially if you see maybe they move from place to place together. Maybe those people could be relatives you didn't know about, or just close family friends that might have came to the US from the same area, or discovered they were from the same area and became friends in the US. And then you can also study the history of the community's immigration. So we might have history books out there on the community which tell where major waves of immigrants came to that locality. And last but not least, come to the Grovener room, visit our friendly and knowledgeable staff. We'd love to help you with your research. There's my email there. You can also, when I email you the handout and a link to the recording, my email will be in that too. So feel free to email me with any questions. We can't do extensive research, but we can try to give advice and tell you what we might have in our collection to help you. Go ahead and stop the sharing.